Welcome to the Terror Time.
The first story is about the grave that whispers. It was a late October night when I found myself standing at the edge of an old cemetery. I wasn't supposed to be there. This graveyard was infamous in town, a place wrapped in unsettling legends. Locals called it cursed, home to an unsolved mystery that had lingered for generations. But being skeptical, I brushed it off as just another horror story. The night air was thick with fog, and the wind howled through the trees. I had my flashlight in hand, its beam weak against the surrounding darkness. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The place was haunted, though I didn't believe it then. Not yet. I made my way to the grave that supposedly belonged to an unnamed woman, a real ghost story that had been passed down like a warning. They said her spirit could be heard at night, whispering to anyone foolish enough to listen. As I approached the headstone, something strange happened. The wind stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the cemetery. My skin prickled, and a deep sense of unease crept over me. Suddenly, I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible, like someone breathing just behind me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as the voice grew clearer, but no words could be understood. Just a soft, persistent sound. I spun around, shining my light into the shadows, but no one was there. Nothing but the creepy silhouettes of ancient tombstones. The air turned cold, unnaturally so, and with it came the overwhelming sensation of being watched. A heavy weight pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I tried to move, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The whispers became louder, more insistent, circling me like a predator toying with its prey. I wasn't alone. I knew it now. There was something there with me, something supernatural. In a desperate attempt to leave, I turned to run. But as soon as I did, the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled and nearly fell into an open grave I hadn't noticed before. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows over the gaping hole. It felt like the earth itself was trying to pull me in, and then I saw her. At the edge of the grave, a figure stood, her face hidden beneath a veil of matted hair. She was still, too still, like a statue carved from shadow. But her eyes, when I caught a glimpse of them, were filled with something inhuman. They were empty, soulless, yet somehow radiating pure evil. The spirit of the woman, the one whose whispers I had heard, was right in front of me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized this wasn't a dream or a figment of my imagination. This was real. The paranormal activity everyone spoke of wasn't just a tale meant to scare tourists. This was a real ghost, and she wasn't happy. She moved toward me, not walking, but gliding across the ground, her feet never touching the earth. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with their chilling chorus. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if the very air around me had thickened, trapping me in place. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone, vanished into thin air. But the feeling of dread, the cold that had seeped into my bones, remained. I bolted, not caring if I stumbled or fell, only focused on one thing: getting out of that cursed place. I could still feel her presence, following me, her unseen eyes burning into my back as I ran. When I finally reached the gate and stumbled onto the road, I stopped to catch my breath. The whispers had faded, the cold had lifted, but the memory of what I'd seen was etched into my mind forever. Some say the unsolved mystery of that cemetery is just a story, a figment of overactive imaginations. But I know the truth. I saw her. I heard her. The chills I felt were real, and the spirit that haunts that grave still lingers, waiting for the next curious soul to fall into her trap. The second story is about the Crypt of Shadows. It was supposed to be just another routine exploration. My friends and I had been drawn to haunted places ever since we were kids. Cemeteries, abandoned houses, any location with a creepy story was on our list. That's how we ended up at the old crypt, hidden deep in the woods, forgotten by time. According to local legend, no one knew who was buried there, and no one dared to find out. It was an unsolved mystery. We weren't scared at first, just curious. The crypt was sealed shut by a massive stone slab, but age had worn it down enough for us to squeeze through a narrow gap. The air inside was stale, thick with the weight of centuries. Our flashlights barely cut through the suffocating darkness. As we ventured deeper, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Something didn't want us there. The temperature dropped, sending chills racing down my spine. I could see my breath in the air, despite it being a warm night. That's when the whispering started. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it quickly grew louder, circling us like a cold breeze. None of us spoke, frozen in place as the whispers filled the crypt. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't just the wind or our imaginations. This was something supernatural. Suddenly, my friend Jason's flashlight flickered, then went out. The others followed suit, one by one, until we were plunged into complete darkness. Panic set in as the whispers grew more aggressive, echoing through the crypt like an angry hiss. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they were glued to the stone floor. That's when I saw it. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing in the corner of the crypt. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Its form was twisted, unnatural, its limbs elongated in ways that defied logic. The spirit glided toward us, its face obscured by shadow, but the malice it radiated was palpable. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. None of us could. We were trapped, caught in the presence of something evil. The figure raised its hand, pointing directly at me. My heart pounded in my chest as an icy sensation gripped my body. It was as if the life was being drained from me, my energy sapped by the mere gaze of this real ghost. The whispers had turned into a deafening roar, as if the crypt itself was alive, trying to push us out. In a last-ditch effort, I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. The impact broke whatever hold the entity had on me, and I bolted toward the entrance, not looking back. The others followed, their footsteps echoing behind me. We barely squeezed through the narrow gap in the slab, collapsing outside in the cool night air. For a moment, I thought we had escaped. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of something scratching against the stone slab, trying to follow us. I turned to look, and there it was, the figure, standing at the crypt's entrance. Its eyes, now glowing a sickly yellow, bore into mine. It didn't follow us out, but I knew it could if it wanted to. We left that night, vowing never to return. But the memories linger. Sometimes when I'm alone, I can still hear the whispers, faint but unmistakable, as if the spirit from the crypt never let me go. And in my worst nightmares, I see those glowing eyes, watching, waiting for me to return. The third story is about the Gravedigger's Curse. It was one of those stories no one believed, until it happened to them. I'd heard whispers about the haunted graveyard on the edge of town, a place where supernatural occurrences were common. But the creepiest part wasn't the graves themselves. It was the old gravedigger, a man who had vanished under strange circumstances. His disappearance became one of the town's greatest unsolved mysteries. Late one evening, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to visit the graveyard, even though something deep inside warned me against it. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from my flashlight, which barely cut through the thick fog. The graveyard was eerily silent, the kind of silence that seemed unnatural. As I approached the old shed where the gravedigger used to keep his tools, I felt it, an overwhelming sense of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My heart raced, but I pressed on, determined to prove the ghost stories wrong. I found the shed door ajar, creaking as it swung gently in the wind. Inside, old shovels and tools lay abandoned, covered in rust and dust. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. But there was something else, something out of place. A freshly dug grave, right in the middle of the graveyard. It wasn't marked, and it definitely wasn't on any records I'd seen. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to believe it, but the stories said that the gravedigger never really left. They said his spirit remained, cursed to dig graves for eternity. And now, standing there, I felt like I was next on his list. Suddenly, the air grew cold, unnaturally cold. I turned around, my flashlight trembling in my hands, and that's when I saw him. A shadowy figure, tall and thin, wearing the tattered clothes of a worker. His face was hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, but I could feel his eyes on me. It was the real ghost of the gravedigger, and he was here. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me, as if daring me to come closer. My legs felt like they were frozen in place, my body refusing to obey the screaming voice in my head, telling me to run. The paranormal activity in the graveyard was undeniable now. I could feel the weight of the gravedigger's curse pressing down on me, as if the earth itself was trying to drag me into the ground. The figure took a step forward, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift. My heart raced, panic setting in as the fog thickened around me. I tried to step back, but my foot sank into the soft earth. The ground was giving way beneath me, and I realized with horror that I was standing on the freshly dug grave. I screamed, struggling to free myself, but the more I fought, the deeper I sank. The gravedigger was closer now, his face still hidden, but I could hear the sound of dirt being shoveled, as if he was preparing my grave. The cold wrapped around me like icy fingers, and I knew this was no dream. This was evil, pure and simple. Just when I thought I was lost, the figure vanished. The fog began to lift and the ground solidified beneath my feet. I scrambled back, breathing heavily, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The gravedigger had let me go, but why? I didn't wait to find out. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far from the graveyard. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that the gravedigger is still out there, waiting for someone else to wander too close. The chills I felt that night were more than just fear. They were a warning. And now, whenever I hear stories about haunted gravesites, I believe them. Because I know what's out there. I saw the gravedigger, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Eyes that had seen too much death. Eyes that were waiting for mine to close. The fourth story is about the cemetery keeper's lantern. There was an old cemetery on the outskirts of town, one that everyone knew to avoid after dark. They said the cemetery keeper still wandered there at night, long after his death. But of all the ghost stories I'd heard growing up, that one never seemed real, until the night I saw the lantern. It was a chilly autumn evening when I found myself passing by the cemetery on my way home. The air was heavy, the kind that made you feel like you were walking through a dream. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a faint light flickering among the gravestones. At first, I thought it was someone else, a lost tourist, or maybe a prankster. But the light moved with an eerie precision, gliding smoothly over the ground. It wasn't natural. Curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I stepped through the old rusted gate. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath in the air, and every hair on my neck stood on end. The light, the lantern, was still moving deeper into the cemetery. There was no one holding it, just the glow, as if being carried by an invisible hand. I followed, my footsteps soft against the damp earth. The gravestones around me were worn, names and dates too faded to read. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Not even the wind stirred. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't stop. The spirit of the cemetery keeper was said to lure people deeper into the grounds, and I was falling right into his trap. Suddenly, the light stopped, hovering above an old, forgotten grave. The name on the headstone was too worn to make out, but something about it felt evil. The lantern flickered once, twice, and then it disappeared, plunging the cemetery into darkness. My flashlight sputtered, casting weak beams across the surrounding graves. That's when I heard it. A low, scraping sound like metal dragging across stone. I whipped around, shining my light in every direction, but saw nothing. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right behind me. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and saw him. The cemetery keeper, or rather his ghost. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. In his hands he held a rusted shovel, the blade scraping the ground as he dragged it behind him. I stood frozen, unable to move. The air around me grew impossibly cold, and I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. He didn't speak, but I didn't need words to understand. He was angry, furious that I had dared to enter his domain. Without warning, he lifted the shovel and slammed it into the ground with a force that shook the earth beneath my feet. The ground cracked open, revealing a fresh grave. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized what was happening. The real ghost of the cemetery keeper was preparing a grave for me. Panic surged through me, but my legs refused to move. The cemetery felt alive, the ground shifting and pulling me toward the open grave. I struggled, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fought against the invisible force dragging me down. The cemetery keeper stood over me, his hollow eyes watching as I sank deeper into the earth. Just when I thought I was lost, the lantern appeared again. Its light was faint, but enough to make the cemetery keeper pause. The pull on my body stopped, and I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air. The lantern flickered once more before vanishing completely, leaving me alone in the graveyard. The cemetery keeper was gone, but the memory of his hollow gaze and the weight of his shovel still haunted me. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far from the cemetery. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that the grave he dug is still there, waiting for me. Sometimes, when I pass by that cemetery at night, I swear I see the faint glow of the lantern drifting among the gravestones, and I wonder if one day it will lure me back. The paranormal activity I felt that night wasn't just a story. It was real. The chills still creep up my spine every time I think about it. The unsolved mystery of the cemetery keeper is no longer a tale I dismiss. I saw his spirit, and I know one thing for certain: the dead aren't always at rest.